Hi there, I'm Mark Pravonik, and welcome to another session of Thinking in the Garage and Drinking Beer. You have to pardon my appearance a little bit. I just came back from a lesson and practice session, and the weather has become quite sticky here in St. Louis, which is nothing unusual for July. But I think today the heat index is supposed to get to 110, and it's supposed to be like this pretty much through Saturday. So obviously, even though I like porters and stouts, this is not porter and stout season, and it is a perfect weather, though, for a very light type of lager beer. And so the beer I have today is made by Golden Road, and it's a mango cart. And, normally I have shied away from fruit or berry flavored beers. And one of the reasons is in the past is that I think a lot of brewers in trying to bring out those flavors just went overboard. And so what you got was a very acidic tasting beer that, tell you the truth, even though it was light, was not necessarily pleasant tasting. But over the last couple of years, brewers have done a really good job. And this beer I was first introduced to a couple months ago at the club. Came in from a hot day. Did not feel like the normal lager that I normally take, that I normally drink. And person there behind the bar suggested the mango cart, tasted it, and fell in love with it immediately. So a very nice beer. You don't have to be playing golf to enjoy it. Obviously, it's a good beer for the evening grill. So when you've got the hamburgers or brats on, this certainly will help quench the thirst over a hot grill. Also, just tasted another beer that I'm going to pour later on, and it's made by Urban Chestnut, and it's called a Lemon Radler. This beer also has just the right combination of the lemon flavor and the beer flavor. I know in the past, just like I said with any of the fruit beers, I know that there's been several brewers who have made lemon type beers, and the problem again is that they've just gone a little bit overboard. You get a little too lemony and a little too acidic. So anyway, this is my new beer of choice for this summer after a hot afternoon on the links. So one of the issues that is, I guess you can say, has stirred the fires of both the left and the right in this country is the topic of immigration. And I know recently I read a meme. My class the other day had to correct me. I said Mimi or a Memi or a Mimi, and they said no, it's a meme. So the other day there was a meme going out on the Facebook pages of people primarily on the left, and it said something to the effect that, well, there are no illegal human beings. And the problem with a lot of discussions that I have found is that the little catchphrases, the little catchwords really don't describe the true nature of the underlying issue. And so one thing that I'm going to try to practice is maybe take a few extra breaths, use a few extra syllables to try to clarify the issue. So in the case of immigration, what we're really talking about are two types of entries into the country. There's the entry that follows the process as outlined by the code, and then there's the entry that circumvents those processes and enters the country outside of the code. So the code is written, or is code is what is in the Immigration and Naturalization Act. And so under the current law, I believe the act allows for 675,000 people per year to enter the country by legal means. And why that number, I don't know. I mean, numbers are numbers. They do have use certain criteria, certain statistical criteria, but why 675? Why not 700? Why not 800,000? Why not a million? I'm not sure. But anyway, there's four main categories for people entering the country through the proper process. And the first one, and the most popular, is what we call family-based immigration. and this applies to those people entering the country that have a relative who is a U.S. citizen, or they're living in the country under a lawful permanent resident program. So the number of entries that are coming through or coming across the borders in this category is approximately 480,000 people per year. The next category for entry is employment-based, and this would include, once again, those that can get permanent status and those on temporary visas. And in this category, there's somewhere around or between 120 and 140,000 entries per year. So between those two categories, that's 600 of the 600,000 to 75,000. And then the 75,000 is allocated between two other categories. One is based on a percentage of where the person is coming from, what country they are originating from. And then there is also the refugee status. And refugee status includes those people who are facing persecution, primarily persecution, government persecution, religious persecution. But interestingly, at least as I read the code, it does not include those who are under some sort of economic despair. And one of the claims of people coming, particularly across the southern border, is that they're seeking refugee status because of gang-related threats and so forth. And I'm not even sure that is a proper definition under the code. So what we have is, and what we've been seeing is, the wringing of the hands, the tears about that these people need help, and that as a Christian nation and so forth, that we shouldn't be turning our back on them and so forth. And I don't disagree with that. I mean, we should help people. But the question is that this country only has so much in resources. And so if we take the stand that, well, we need to help everybody, and therefore anybody who comes to the borders we should let in as part of our compassion, we run into a problem. Because if we're looking at just a category of economic despair, or that there are gang-related threats and so forth, well, half the world can claim that. So are we going to say, well, we open our arms to 3.5 billion people on this globe, and so I'm sure you'd say, well, Mark, that's a ridiculous thought, but that's where it leads. If we're going to look at it that way, if we are not making any restrictions or distinctions, we then open the door to 3.5 billion people. Okay, so if it's not 3.5 billion people, is it 3 billion people? 2.5 billion? 2 billion? 1 billion? 500 million? What is the number? And so when people talk about, particularly politicians, about immigration reform, the question has to be asked, are we talking about numbers, or are we talking about the ability to enter the country, or the processes to enter the country? From my standpoint, the importance is the number. Because you can always define within that number the categories that are allowable. But we have to settle on a number. If 675,000 isn't the number, again, what is the number? And I think the one thing is that we have to take into account, like I said before, is the resources of the country. We only have so much land. We only have so much capital. We only have so much land in this country for food production. And so even though the argument can be made for immigration that, yes, it increases the labor force, yes, it can lead to economic growth, there does come what we call on the margin in economics, where that one extra person crossing the border now is no longer a benefit, but actually a negative impact on the country, because we simply cannot produce enough food. We cannot produce enough housing. We cannot produce enough hospitals to take care of that one extra person coming across the border. So here's my question, and I don't have the answer, but here's the question. If we're going to talk about immigration in an adult fashion, and that is, what is the number? What is the realistic number that this country can take in and still continue to have economic growth, still continue to have future generations become better off than the previous generations? The one thing is, too, that we have to consider about the people coming across the southern border is that we're talking about not scientists, we're not talking about engineers. Yes, we are talking about people, but we are talking about primarily people of lower skilled and less educated. And we right now have cities full of people sitting around with nothing to do who are less educated and lower ranked as far as skills go. And we know that as automation and as technology improves, that the lower skilled and less educated people are going to find it harder and harder and harder to find a job. So what is the benefit of bringing more people, allowing more people in that simply are going to find themselves in the same place as the people presently, for instance, in our inner cities find themselves? Are we just transferring one ghetto to another? That's a harsh statement, but I think it has to be looked at realistically. So what can we do? One, what's the number? What is the number that we can sit down and logically say, this is the population increase that the country can handle? And then secondly, I think the other thing is that should be examined, and actually Hungary has proposed this as far as African migrants, and that is to give the help where they live. And there are organizations that do that. I mean, you can sponsor children. You can sponsor children through the Heifer Project. You can sponsor children through Compassion International and so forth. I would say that the United Nations and governments actually do a pretty poor job of helping people. A lot of times that money ends up into the very people that are causing the problem. I know one time at the United Nations, and I was a little bit of a smartass, but I think I was very truthful. And the United Nations, we were on a tour there, and the tour guide, and she was talking about the great things that United Nations organizations do, and that there's still so much work because there's always so much work. There's always going to be poor. There's always going to be the downtrodden. And I made the comment, well, you know what? If you really want to help people, the first thing to do is to introduce them and promote the one economic system that we know has lifted the greatest number of people out of poverty, and that is free markets and private enterprise. In other words, let's promote capitalism. But again, like I said, if we really want to help people, let's decide on a number. And then secondly, it's not going to include everybody. We know it can't. But if we're truly charitable, then I would urge people certainly to consider things like Compassion International, Heifer Project, and even at your own churches. And I know particularly at our church, we're sponsoring not only a school, a church complex over in India. We also have another one down in Peru to where there is a direct flow of funds, benefits to people who truly need it. So anyway, I got to go back to the range. I'm trying to exercise some golf demons right now. Unfortunately, I let some bad habits continue, thought that I could solve them myself, and unfortunately now it has turned into something evil. Met with my pro Adam this morning, and we seem to have got the demons on the run, but I'm going to go back to the course and see if I can whip them once and for all. So until the next time, cheers, stay cool, and happy times on the links. Thank you.